Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Where's our guys? There they are. Thank you very much. Like the shirt? Wife went and did a little bit of shopping. Mark's Warehouse has specials, so if you want to join the Plaid family, check out Mark's. They got it. They're not a sponsor or anything like that. We don't do that. But yeah, there's a special. So join the Plaid family. So, folks, we're on Wednesday. We're trucking along. We had great responses yesterday. Wonderful from Facebook. You guys are growing. You guys are like a garden. It's just growing like crazy. It actually takes time now to go through the comments. So, good job. I am willing to put in that time. I'm going to read every comment as I promised. I'll respond to some of them. And some of them are actually wonderful tips as well. We got the charges. We now know what the charges are. We got a picture of the docket. So we actually know what the charges are, the criminal code violations, right down to the subsection. So now we're going through that. And yes, there are gun charges. Possession. Which one? What was wrong with the possession? Doesn't say, of course. But what we learned yesterday from somebody who was paying very close attention, our very own Danielle, she explained to us how there was one handgun, which is the illegal one. So for the first time in the, history, 4 men are now charged with holding the same gun at the same time. I don't know. I think you should be charged per trigger. If there's one trigger, there should be one charge. You can't have 4 fingers on a trigger. So that's peculiar. But the good news is the Canadian Coalition of Firearm Rights, Tracy Wilson, she's reviewed that. She's reviewing that episode now. I've sent her the charges. And these are the kind of things she was looking for. So maybe she'll be getting involved. Maybe she'll take a closer look. She can't help with the conspiracy side of things, of course. But these gun charges, this is what they do. So we'll be taking a look at that, because how do you have 4 charges? 4 fingers, 1 trigger? Don't know. It just seems like things were thrown. In our world, in technology, we call that copying and pasting. So it looks like they kind of grouped together some charges and copied and pasted it 4 times. Kind of looks that way. It's kind of what we're looking into, isn't it? But the good news is Canadian media's got this covered, right? They're writing about it, they're making stories, and they're showing us. No, this is the Canadian coverage right here. You're looking at it. I'm proud to do it. I'm happy to do it. It's just sad that I have to, because we should have a lot more coverage on this. This is a violation of human rights. That's not even an opinion anymore. That's my assessment. I'm not alone on that assessment either. There are people that care. They do want to talk about this. They want to look into it. They're interested in the facts, putting it together, sharing it. And we're not alone in this world. We may be alone in Canada when it comes to media, but we're not alone in this world. South of the border is a big country. If I was Kamala Harris, I would say it's a big country beside a small country, Canada. But there's a big country down there, and the people care. And we saw that during the convoy. Tucker Carlson, other media were taking a look at what's going on up here. That was good attention. But sometimes that's the only attention we're going to get is from another country. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today, because we've been reached out by a freelance writer who represents and is writing for Newsweek. You know, that little magazine news thing down there, Newsweek. And they said, hey, look, we heard about these guys. Can you take a look into that? So he is. So he reached out. We have him on today. We chatted with him on Monday. He's collecting his information, and he's very, very interested in making sure he has the truth. He is he's taking his time to make sure he's dotting his I's, crossing the T's, and is accurate. So that's exciting. We didn't have any narrative coming from him. He's just basically telling us, look, we want to know what's going on. We're still dealing with Jan 6 and political prisoners down here. Do you guys have some up there? Kind of sounds like it. So he's going to sit and chat with us today. Granny's with us, Donald's with us, and we're going to answer questions. We're going to talk about media. We're going to even talk about why our media isn't covering it. We'll be speculating because none of them are here to tell us. So we're just going to have to chat and try to figure this out. But it is an absolute privilege to have everybody here today, and I'm going to bring them all in right now. Good morning, Donald.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Granny.
Good morning.
And good morning to our new friend, Gord. How are you doing?
Top of the morning or bottom of the evening, as it were.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you, my friend. Now, we're going to get you to introduce yourself, but I believe you're a Canadian who's working down south. So you have a lot of ties to Canada, so you have some interests up here, but you've been down in the States for a bit. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Gord?
Right. Well, yeah, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, so I am Canadian. I immigrated to the United States in 2016. My wife is American. I met her in 2011. We got married in 2013. Did some overseas travel. I worked for a trucking company in Australia. Um, I'm a trucker, have been my entire life. I was born in Hamilton,
honk.
Ontario. Yeah, honk honk. I was born in Hamilton, Ontario. Was working for a trucking company, washing trucks, greasing trailers, doing all the stuff like after school when I was a kid. Got my Ontario Class A as soon as I turned 18. I took a big truck to my high school graduation.
Nice.
instead of a limo, I brought a cab over Kenworth.
It worked. Oh, you had a date.
I sure did. And a bunk.
It's early. It's early.
Yeah. So, yeah, I started dabbling in writing a few years ago, prior to sort of COVID happening, right around 2017 or so. These guys at a blog here in the US, a very tiny little blog, asked me to write some things for them. So I did. And then I was off social media at that time because everybody lost their minds because of Donald Trump, including various members of my family and my in-laws. And I was just like, right, peace out. I'm done with social media. So I was off for like 2 years. I had zero social media. And I started doing some blogging about the trucking business. I got to know this guy who runs a podcast down here, and he had me on his show to discuss just labor market issues with truck drivers. How come, we don't get paid enough? There's this retention problem. They're always looking for truck drivers. Why is that? What's the history of the business? And I started reading some work by various academics who've studied it, like, like sociologists, labor historians. So I took some deep dives into my own business just because I was curious about it. And I had some success in writing about it. I mean, this is a very tiny niche, like, trucking labor market economics. Like, who the hell's going to listen to that?
Yeah.
Right. Who's interested in that? So I started experimenting with Twitter about 2018 or 19. And then I had a couple of accounts. I erased them. I didn't like it. I didn't get it. Like, I'm not that kind of guy. And then I started again just because I was getting interested in stuff. And, Twitter's where like all your academics, politicians, interesting people are, right? Writers, media people. So I jump back in, and then COVID happens. And people soon discover, like, who's actually wearing the pants, who's getting things done, who's actually making society function while most of the chattering classes are hiding at home in their pajamas. And I was asked again to write on my experience as a trucker during COVID. I was hauling propane. It was in the middle of winter when COVID hit. I was still working like 70, 80 hours a week. People were like, how come you can work so many hours? And I had to explain to them about hours of service waivers for certain classes of worker who are just allowed to keep going no matter what.
Right.
And then COVID wears on, and then Trudeau just starts being Trudeau, and the Freedom Convoy shows up. And this is like all of my things. Trucking labor, vaccine mandates, me being Canadian, the whole cross-border mandate thing was just vexatious to me and made no sense, and it was just wrong.
And it ended up being an economic thing in the end. That
you
had all of your check boxes.
So it just so happened to coincide with the rig I was driving at the time having serious mechanical problems they couldn't address, and I told my boss, I'm going home to Canada. I'm going home to support these guys. So I get in my pickup, drive to Ottawa. They hassled me at the border, of course, at Thousand Islands. And I just told PHAC to go to hell because I had no Vax card and no intentions of complying with any of their garbage. And I met up with a friend of mine that lives about 50K west of Ottawa. And me and him, a bunch of his friends and family, some other friends of mine, went out, welcomed the convoy into town. We were the people on the overpass, waving flags, the whole 9 yards. And I was live streaming it on Twitter. I mean, mind you, I only had like 2,000 followers at the time. But, you know, they went viral. A bunch of my videos went super viral. And I was there for the whole first weekend. I get in my pickup truck, drive back home because I had to go back to work. You know, I've got 2 little kids, and, you know, I couldn't stay in Ottawa, unfortunately. Drive back home, and my inbox just starts blowing up with like people, hey man, what's going on up there? Can you explain this? And this woman who is a labor writer, I wouldn't say she's a labor writer, but she covers like labor and working class issues, or kind of her bugaboo. And she at the time she was a deputy editor at Newsweek. She said, hey Gord, would you mind writing something for us? I mean, you were there. What's your perspective? You're not part of the media. You are Canadian. Tell us what you saw at Freedom Convoy. What do you think about it? So I write this piece for Newsweek. It went super viral. And then about a week and a half after I wrote that piece, I got a phone call. So mind you, while this is all happening, my truck is still broken down. So I'm at home. I'm trying to get a hold of people. I'm trying to like write more about this. I was asked to be on a TV show in the UK, GB News. I did a little segment for them, you know, because because I was there and because I wrote about it, like it just kind of went crazy, right? Because at the time, most media didn't have their people in Ottawa because of COVID, right? So a lot of the world's media outside of Canada were relying on the Canadian media, who, of course, went into full-on battle mode against the Freedom Convoy, right? Mm-hmm. So people wanted to know an alternative perspective rather than whatever they were being fed by the CBC or CTV or whoever. I happened to be on Twitter. They start asking me, you know, and I'm sure there was lots of other people in Canada doing the same thing. I just happened to be living in the US and I had this connection with Newsweek. Mm-hmm. So I ended up writing within about 2 weeks, I wrote 3 different articles for Newsweek on the Freedom Convoy. One was just like about first going there. Another one was about the media reaction and how they were basically smearing us. And then I wrote one on why all the labor unions were essentially calling us fascists and abandoning us and basically saying, no, the truckers, the hell with that. You guys should just get your shots, just comply. You know,
what was your assessment on that? Why did they do that?
What do you think? Well, it's multivariant, but the biggest one is a deeper problem with the labor movement, which is that the leadership of the labor movement, whether it's public sector unions or private sector unions, their leadership are no longer drawn from the shop floor. They're a They're a professionalized administrative caste, right? They all have a lot of them have post-grad credentials. They're all university educated. Many of them come from the same sort of class of people. They're not necessarily working class. A lot of them are ideologically motivated, and they're generally, for lack of a better term, on the left. And unfortunately, because of the way the media has functioned and the way COVID has gone, resistance to COVID is coded as right wing, and complying is coded as left. So basically, like, to their minds, anybody that didn't want to get their vaccine or wanted to retain their bodily sovereignty was just immediately dismissed as a right winger, regardless of anything else. So the labor unions basically went in that direction. And you know, they repeated all the things. I went and did all my research. You could see every single organization, whether it was the people, whatever it was, the Canadian Auto Workers became, I think they were called CAN4 or I4, Canadian Steelworkers, Teamsters, all the public sector unions, every single one of them on the front page of their websites had denouncements of the Freedom Convoy, all of them across the board.
And that's what killed public perception for sure.
Right. Yeah, that didn't help. So I wrote something on that for Newsweek. Anyway, story goes on. This lady at Fox News named Laura Ingraham.
Yeah, we've heard her.
Yeah, she's, you know, she's a bit of an interesting figure. I mean, I can't say I was a huge fan, but anyway, I'm at home here and I get this email on a Friday afternoon. I think it was February 11th, right? But so the week before they declared the Emergencies Act, Laura Ingraham's people contacted me and said, hey, do you want to come on Laura's show this afternoon? And she wants to talk to you about one of your Newsweek articles. I'm like, okay. I was kind of shocked, like I didn't realize sort of what I'd stepped into.
Okay.
And I go on Fox, 5-minute segment. She did most of the talking. I think I got like 3 or 4 sentences in. Fine, whatever. But I mean, she was on the side of the Freedom Convoy, and she was very critical of all the people who are like smearing us and casting aspersions on these protesters. And I thought, all right, cool. Laura Ingraham gets millions of viewers in the US. I get to say my piece. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
So that goes down on a Friday afternoon. Less than 24 hours later on the Saturday, my Twitter account was suspended. And then the following day, I started getting text messages from people I used to know in Canada, including my oldest best friend who I've known since I was in kindergarten, who basically said, don't talk to me anymore. I have no idea who you are.
What? So out of the blue, people from your past are reaching out?
Yep. People who didn't talk to me all through COVID or hadn't spoken to me in like a year, 2 years, 3 years, or it was like perfunctory sharing kid photos, whatever. They just came out of the woodwork and declared me a fascist. No questions asked. You're on Fox News. You're defending the Freedom Convoy. F you.
Okay.
No opportunity to discuss it. Like they just basically abandoned me.
But it was people you did know. Like there was a human behind that. It wasn't.
Yes, from my personal life, like friends of mine.
Incredible.
Yeah, wow. I have family members who, having seen the mainstream media coverage, one of my cousins who I've been tight with my entire life went on Facebook. This is my sister telling me this because I'm not on Facebook. That my cousin went on Facebook, said, anybody that supports the Freedom Convoy is dead to me. I don't ever want to talk to you again.
How do they not understand that that statement itself is evil and just really wrong?
I don't know. Everybody's critical faculties went out the window, and it's like, okay, I get it. People get lied to. People get caught up in this moral panic. We were primed for this after almost Freedom Convoy. We're almost 2 years into this pandemic, and I get it. And some people, got sick. Some people died. So there's a lot of people were worried about this stuff, but you can't just believe what the government tells you. You can't just believe what the media tells you. And it's incredible to me as someone who grew up kind of skeptical of, I grew up around 9/11, Iraq War, all that stuff. I went to Iraq War protests. I was against the war from the start. I've bounced around ideologically. I've been on the left. A lot of my family and in-laws are all progressives. That's fine. But I was always taught, be skeptical, talk things out, read as much as you can about stuff, make your own decisions.
Perfect.
And with COVID, all of that went out the window. All these people that I grew up with who said, oh my God, don't believe the media. They lied us into the war. Well, the media just lied you into believing that protesting against mandates, demanding your freedoms back makes you a fascist. And you just bought it hook, line, and sinker. Right. Yep. And no opportunity for discussion. Right. So we
haven't seen that since 1939 Germany, I think.
If any of these folks had called me, and like I said, they have my phone number, my email address, they could have said, hey, Gord, how the hell did you end up on Fox News? Why are you writing the things you do? What did you see in Ottawa? Out of all the people I know anywhere that were against the Freedom Convoy or supporters of Trudeau, only one guy called me to say, hey, what's going on?
No. That's weird. I don't know if there's mass psychosis or what's going on there, but we've seen that here as well, for sure, all over the place. Families are broken apart, and I think that's part of the design of that. So now, Coutts, how did Coutts ring into your ear? How did Coutts come up?
Well, like I say, I paid pretty close attention to Freedom Convoy. I knew there was all these other protests, right? Because the nice thing about Freedom Convoy was that it was spontaneous. There was no central command. I mean, outside of what was going on in Ottawa. So
even today, there's no central command.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. No comment on any of the infighting or any of that stuff.
Yeah, we just know there's no leader.
Yeah, I'm outside of all that, and I've never been involved.
Yeah. Well, I'm interviewing them all, so I hear about it.
Oh, so yeah, I knew about Coutts. I knew there was like a small the big one was in Manitoba for a little while, right? Like they basically at Emerson, there was a big protest there before Freedom Convoy even got to Ottawa, and then obviously the Windsor Bridge, the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, I should say. So yeah, I knew about the Coutts boys, and that there'd been people arrested, and everybody knows this famous photo who Donald did an excellent breakdown on.
Yeah.
And but I didn't know too many details of the case, and then I start talking to my aunt, Kate, who we just spoke about pre-show, and she said to me, as like, you know, I've continued to write here and there. I started my own podcast, which is not necessarily about politics or Freedom Convoy, although I've had a few episodes on that. It's mostly supposed to be focused on trucking, but you know, Trudeau being Trudeau and this issue with the Coutts boys still being around, I had to look into it. So I spoke with my Aunt Kate. She said, you really, really need to contact this woman in Alberta named Margaret Mackay, because she knows everything that's going on with these guys in Coutts. And I'm like, oh yeah, so they arrested some people. Are they really still in prison? And my aunt's like, yeah, they're still in remand. Like they haven't been let out yet. And I'm like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. So I reach out to Margaret. I start reading her Facebook group. I try and dig up as much information as I can. And I couldn't believe it. Like, these guys have been in jail for how long? No bail? No trial? What? I'm like, we've had the POEC. We've had all this stuff. Like, I thought we are supposed to be moved past it. So I asked Margaret to be on my podcast. And in the meantime, I've started yet another Twitter account. And sure enough, I do a show with Margaret, release it, and a week and a half later, my Twitter account got nuked again for a third time.
Now this is Elon days nuked.
This is Elon days. Yeah, we would have thought. I would have thought. I think I've been kicked off 3 times. The first time was because of my association with somebody else who has a bunch of vigilantes after her at all times, because she's like an arch enemy of the Democratic Party and was associated with a guy whose podcast I've been on twice. So I come to find out from her that there's these groups that like have Discord servers, Discord chats, where they take screenshots and they chase people around on Twitter and then like just mass report tweets. Mm-hmm. They used to have some kind of in with Twitter, and they would send them all these files on people saying, you know, this person said this, you should kick them off. And I think I was the victim of this vigilante group. And then when I was on Fox News, somebody in that vigilante group saw me, boom, gone again. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think these vigilante groups are mostly on the left, so to speak. And again, you know, in their minds, anybody resisting COVID measures is automatically a Nazi. So we need to be dealt with in their minds.
Right.
And I think even since Mr. Musk has taken over Twitter, I don't think he got rid of all of those people. And then with Twitter files, we've seen the involvement of the American deep state with Twitter, right? CIA, FBI, all these top level agencies are all either former employees of them, work for Twitter. They all have all these meetings. They get sent lists of people to get kicked off or investigated. Like we've seen
Twitter money for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. So we've seen all this stuff. I have to assume that there's an analog for that for other countries. Like other Western countries are also involved in either not necessarily Twitter's operation, but have some kind of relationship with like Twitter's own internal security for booting people off and doing censorship stuff.
I would say at minimum the Five Eye countries are.
Yeah, at minimum, right? So it would not surprise me to find out, like, somebody do a Twitter Files Canada, please. And
I've asked him for it. We haven't seen it. That might be the answer, by the way.
Yeah, I think if a Twitter Files Canada came through and they had a list of people who were interfered with, I would be on it.
Quite possibly, yeah. Basically, if you had a trucker in your thing, you're on it. And I believe I'm on some sort of list. It might be a C18 list because I'm a journalist. but there's a lot of repression happening on Twitter in the last couple of months.
So speaking of C-18, hasn't Trudeau's had some difficulty getting that passed, and there was supposed to be a big meeting with like Meta and Google, and they basically told him to get lost. Like, what happened there?
Meta did, for sure. I'm not sure what's going on with Google, and we definitely got nothing out of Twitter. But we can get into that one at another time because I'm going to cover C-18. And now that I know that you're interested, I'll bring you back for that episode.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll get into that one. But yeah, there's some suppression happening around C-11, C-18. Yeah, we can get into that one. But now Newsweek reached out to you about Coutts.
Right. So my my editor at Newsweek, her name is Batya Ungar-Sargon. She has a book out kind of about how, woke politics is sort of affecting the left and the working class, and it's probably a bad idea.
It's nice to hear that media has somebody that's not completely woke.
Yeah, and she's writing another book, and she was recently promoted from deputy opinion editor at Newsweek to their main. So all of the opinion editorials, she edits the whole thing. She's the big cheese. So Batya and I were texting one day, and she said, "Hey, I listened to your podcast with Margaret Mackay in Alberta, and Newsweek would really like to hear more about this. Like that, there's an article there, and like basically nobody in the United States knows what's going on with this issue. So please write something for us." Here we are.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So from your own perspective, you've been at the convoy, you knew about the media here being garbage. So with all of this wrapped up, you reached out to Granny, brought her on your show. Newsweek said, look, we want to know more. You reached out to Donald, me, Granny again, and now we're talking.
Yeah, This is information collecting,
Now, how's that article going? And when do you?
I'm roughly halfway through it. I think once we get off here and I shut my laptop, I'm not going to shut it. I'm going to move over to my word processor and bang away on it, and then make sure everything's tight, make sure all my links and fact checking is good, and then I'll have another pair of eyes go over it to make sure we don't run afoul of the publication ban in Canada. Make sure I don't have any of that's on court proceedings, correct?
Correct. And documents, right. Court documents.
Yeah. So I'm not going to have any of that stuff in there. I'll do my best to remain compliant. And then I'll send it to Newsweek. And anytime I write an article, most people that write know this. Like if you aren't on your own platform, if you write for somebody else, they always do editing with you, right? Not necessarily for content, sometimes for content, but usually style, structure, crossing T's, dotting I's, legal stuff, making sure everything's tight. And so that, Batya and I will usually bounce an article back and forth 2 or 3 times, take us a couple hours. So if I get it to her this afternoon or tomorrow, maybe it'll go out tomorrow. Typically, we don't like to run articles on Fridays because Fridays are a dead news day, especially in the summer because people are going away.
Right.
And the sort of media cycles, as it were, are sort of like on their tail end on Fridays. So it seems likely that it probably won't come out till next week.
That sounds fine. As long as it comes out, that's what we're excited about.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I mean, obviously, it's an opinion piece, right? I want to be very clear with people that like, I'm not some investigative journalist. I'm just a freelance writer, just like some of you guys, just like many of the people watching this show. And I was asked to submit it. So like, it's necessarily going to have my own biases in it. And however, like I say, I do want it to like all the facts to be true. This is what's happening. And the opportunity here is really basically getting the story out, right? Like the Canadian media ecosystem, as you guys know, the mainstream media is very insular. They're subsidized by Trudeau. They don't say anything outside of a very narrow Overton window.
Mm-hmm.
They're always looking in their own belly buttons. And the historical relationship with the Canadian media and other media in the world, especially in the United States, is how do I put this? It's kind of bipolar. Yeah, the Canadian media will get really excited if someone in the United States notices Canada. Like, when I was growing up, I remember the Jon Stewart show did a little tiny bit where they kind of made fun of Stephen Harper and the Conservatives and said, here's the Conservative logo from Canada, and it's like a gay hippie pride flag or something, right? As if to say the Conservatives in Canada are milquetoast, which, looking back on it, it's kind of true.
You should see what Pierre said just yesterday.
Yeah. But, Stewart did that piece, and like the Canadian media like went into a meltdown because like they were just like they got all the feels, oh wow, the Americans notice us, Jon Stewart loves us, but if you're me and you go on Laura Ingraham, you get thrown off Twitter. If you say anything bad about Canada or like realistic about it, you get ignored or get accused of being whatever, like I say, because of their insularity, and again, they're not talking about the Coutts thing. It benefits them not to discuss it. Trudeau doesn't want it talked about. The RCMP probably don't want it talked about. And I mean, most people in the United States don't even know about the Portapique massacre, right?
The what?
Yeah, exactly. What's Portapique? What's Nova Scotia? Like, the stuff like the things that are like really big deal in Canada often enough do not penetrate the American media at all. I mean, it's not that people don't know about it. Like there's lots of Canadian expats. There are some people who do pay attention to Canada, but like it doesn't puncture the wider zeitgeist, So I'm hoping that in writing this piece, another person notices it. Maybe, maybe Laura Ingraham again, maybe Tucker Carlson, someone, it'll come across their desk and they'll be like, oh, wow. So January 6th isn't just for DC, because there's the parallels between the two stories, these
That's what I was going to ask you about was what's comparable and why does it seem like we're just a year and a half behind their version or 2 years behind?
There's a couple of things going on here. Right. So as we know from POEC and documents exposed during that, the people working for Marco Mendocino were basically seeding the narrative with the media before the convoy even got to
we heard about
Ottawa. Right. Yeah. And they used terms like January 6th. And then when the convoy arrives in Ottawa, like Trudeau immediately skips town. Because
250 RCMP officers
with what?
250 RCMP officers protected him.
That's how many of them went with him into that chalet.
That was in the POEC. Yeah, it came out in the POEC. That's why there's a chunk of RCMP office. Yeah, that's why the resources were so low. 250 officers were protecting his cabin.
Holy shit! Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know it was that many guys. That's incredible. So Trudeau thinks he's getting his January 6th. And then as the media are doing their thing, reporting about Freedom Convoy and the occupation of Ottawa, they keep saying the same thing. This is January 6th. We want to prevent a January 6th. These guys are going to be violent. They're extremists. So like they start seeding this January 6th narrative. And you get the feeling that they wanted it to happen. Like Trudeau really wanted to have a January 6th so he could be like, I'm just like Joe Biden having to put up with all these far right wingers.
That's why all the name calling and the division and all.
Yeah, they were literally. It feels like they were trying to goad people into it, and thankfully, Freedom Convoy did not deliver. Totally peaceful. Crime goes down in Ottawa. No violence. Nothing happens. The media who did say try and put stuff on us, that was all shown to be lies. No January 6th. No invading Parliament, no violence, none of that stuff. So I think one of the reasons the Coutts thing it feels the way it does is because I think they're still trying to hold on to it.
They have to. It's holding up the POEC report.
Right. Trudeau still wants to have these boogeymen to make it seem like there's this like far right extreme element in Canada. I mean, again, I'm using their terms. This is nothing. This is no way I would describe it. and there's a deeper thing going on here, right? With like the sort of worldwide sort of populist movement, for lack of a better term, the rejection of globalism, rejection of organizations like the World Economic Forum, the rejection of, local political sovereignty being usurped by international corporations and by these organizations like the WEF. There's a whole ecosystem out there of NGOs, nonprofits, foundations that recycle money for the wealthy and corporations. And then this ecosystem of all these organizations are running around influencing policy, getting in bed with, like the people on K Street, lobbyists in DC, and they're doing this in countries around the world. They're totally unaccountable. You can't vote them out. And they get to say, oh, we're just a foundation. We don't actually do anything. That's the government's fault. So it's like this extra layer of government that you actually can't get rid of. Correct. And people are starting to see this, right? And now if you see that, if you reject it, if you actually are pro-democracy, no, we get to vote on things, we the people, they have to cast you as some kind of like right-wing extremist person. I remember growing up, the WTO and IMF protests, right, the battle in Seattle, the one in Quebec City. And like, I was, I guess I shared the same position as the left in that, like, no, international corporations shouldn't be telling locals what to do.
Correct.
Now that's been inverted. The left fully supports it. I didn't move. People think I'm a right winger. I haven't moved. I've always been against war.
Big tech, big pharma, big TV. They're supporting it all.
Yeah, no. So this thing with Coutts is like, it's their last stab at having some legitimate, in their eyes, boogeyman, someone they can pin this onto, something they can point to and say, we have a problem here in Canada with like these right-wing extremists. And it just, they're not that. These guys, it strikes me that they're being caught up in this like sort of Kafkaesque, Camusian absurdist nightmare, right? Like where they're being put on trial for things they didn't do because the government needs to have them. The government needs this boogeyman, and it's a travesty and miscarriage of justice. And another thing I'll add to that, there's more of a demand for right-wing extremists and racists and whatever than there actually is a market to deliver it, right? So, or I should say a supply. In 2016, after Trump was nominated and the American media went insane denouncing him and saying, oh my God, all these right-wingers are around. There used to be this blog in the United States called Slate Star Codex. Okay. And this guy, he's a professional psychiatrist, but he's also like fairly autistic and just one of these people that's like a borderline genius. And like he can write 1,000,000 miles an hour and he studies things. And he was a really, really popular blog for a long time. The New York Times attacked him at one point and he had to shut his blog down. Oh, wow. Because he was very influential, especially in Silicon Valley, and with a sort of movement called rational. It'll come to me. But anyway, so this guy did a study. He did his own study. He's like, okay, cool. Where are all these white supremacists? Where are all these like Ku Klux Klan guys? Where are all these people that are supposedly a threat to the nation? He went around to the websites those people have, such that there are any and exist, forums where they talk, went through all the FBI statistics, investigating them. He went hard and he wrote this huge long article about it saying like, you guys are chasing ghosts. So his conclusion was, from all the statistics that he could scrape up, all the numbers of all the forums, all of the people that were out openly saying, yeah, we need to return, the South will rise again. Black people are bad, whatever. All these like noxious views came to like a number, 25,000 people tops, right? And then he said, tell you what, in case I screwed things up, let's double it. Let's assume it's 50,000 people. None of them hold any positions of power. None of them are part of any political parties. They're rejected by everyone. They're not in any institution. and 50,000 people is like 0.003% of the United States population. Like, this boogeyman is pretty small, and and that post made him a lot of enemies, and it made him a lot of enemies because it poked a hole in their narrative that
Correct.
this looming threat, this constant threat of like white nationalist extremist is going to take over the country. How is 0.003% of the country, who have no institutional backing, no attachments to the political parties, no establishment backing, everybody hates them, the media denounces them at every turn they get, how are they a threat? Like,
I can answer that.
How are they?
Well, the group that's making them a threat, they themselves is a very small group, and they know how to get into organizations and spread. So they understand that a small group can influence a large group because they're doing it right now themselves. So this is
Right.
convection through projection. So they are worried that a small group can do it because they are currently doing it themselves. So they know it's possible, and they're not wrong. But they're at the wrong group. It's not going to be the white supremacist group. It's going to be the grassroots patriots that do it.
Sure. Like, I have no opinion on that, but I just want to make the point that like these boogeymen are always very small in number and never have any power.
Correct.
There's a guy, an academic in Kentucky. I think he's in Kentucky. His name's Wilfred Riley. He's like a mulatto guy. He's half white, half black. He wrote this book called Hate Crime Hoaxes. And he
Right.
went through all of these published stories in the media of supposed hate crimes, and then later found out they were hoaxes, and then went through all the police reports, all the judgments, all the court stuff, and like hundreds of them. And the same thing happens. Somebody reports a hate crime, and the media freaks out and turns it into a big circus. And then several weeks or months later, it's shown that the person was making it up. And
More often than not, it is.
Yeah, this guy has a whole book on this. So what you've got here is a demand for boogeymen. The supply is not meeting it, so they have to make it up. So what's happening with the Coutts guys is an example of the same thing, but in Canada. There's a demand for right-wing extremism to match all the rhetoric and all the fear-mongering in the media, and the Canadian public are not producing it because the Canadian public are mostly like normal, Western liberal people and aren't like that. So in order to maintain Trudeau's fear-mongering narrative, they have got to keep having a boogeyman, and the Coutts guys are that, and they're basically being run over by the legal system in that pursuit. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I also agree with this question from John. So John says, do white supremacists even exist? I've never met one.
Supplementalists.
Yeah, I've never met any. So I guess John's onto something there.
That supplementalist comment is really interesting, given the was it C47? They're trying to get rid of natural supplements and sort of like health foods market, or like vitamins, different products. They're trying to regulate it like pharmaceuticals, because again, in the pursuit of, we have to lift up rocks and find Nazis everywhere. They're now trying to connect, they say people who are anti-vaxxers are now right-wing extremists. Well, what are anti-vaxxers into? Most of them are fairly health conscious people, right?
Yep.
Oh no, they take supplements. Well, I guess they're white supplementalists now.
Well, let me tell you something about that one. Let me tell you something, because I actually came up with the Coutts boy. So one of our guys needs supplements, not medication. He needs supplements. He's got a gut issue. He needs this stuff. But because supplements are not available through Alberta Health Services, he's been denied. So he can't get the supplements he needs because it's not approved through Alberta Health Services, and they're only allowed things that are available through Alberta Health Services. So even that kind of has come up with our boys.
Wow. Yeah, it's terrible. So maybe Margaret can speak to this. What is everyone's condition now? Like all four of the boys,
Yes, you
where
should hear
are
this.
they? What sort of what sort of facility are they in? Are they in solitary? Like, what's happening with them like right now?
So right now in real time, we've got Chris Lysick and Chris Carbert are in Lethbridge. They've been in Lethbridge since day one. And Tony started out in Lethbridge, and then I think it was 4 or 5 months later, he went to Medicine Hat. And then when they went for their pre-trial here, he would have been moved to Lethbridge just before June 12th. He stayed in Lethbridge through the trial or the pre-trial, and now he's currently sitting in a gang ward in Calgary, remand. I spoke with him last night. I asked him how he's doing, and he says, yeah, I'm okay. It is what it is. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
And which of the boys was this?
That's Tony.
Tony.
And he figures, like, he's literally counting. Last night he tells me, he says, I've only got 8.25 days and I should be back in Lethbridge. That's how he's counting, 8.25 days. Like, he is,
yeah,
it's sad. So, and then when they were in Lethbridge, Tony and Jerry, when they got to Lethbridge, had to be put in 2 separate areas of segregation because they had no place to put them, because Chris and Chris were currently in Lethbridge. So they started out, if it wasn't a court day, they would be locked down for 22 hours in segregation. It was pretty rough on them. And then Jerry, he's been in basically Calgary remand, a gang ward, since day one. And he went down to Lethbridge for the court, and he was put in segregation with 22 hours a day when he wasn't in court. It was a little bit rougher, I feel, in Lethbridge because his iPad would not work in his cell. There was a cordless phone. If they needed to make a call, they could use it, but it didn't work in his cell. So his time in Lethbridge was a little bit tougher, that's for sure. But he's now back in Calgary also. And they will sit there until just prior to the 25th of July. So I would think about the 20th of July, they should be moving back to Lethbridge. And that means Tony and Jerry again will be put into segregation because there's nowhere to put them. And
how about their health and food? Yeah.
Okay, so there's been, each one of them has had a story throughout this period of time. A lot happens in 514 days.
Jesus Christ. Oh.
I know. Chris Carbert said to me, he said, the worst part of the remand is Alberta Health Services. He said he ended up with an abscessed tooth. It was a nightmare. I can only imagine having a tooth pulled while you're in there. He ended up with some form of an infection that he could barely, like, he thought he was going to go crazy. And so that was what he went through. And that's probably just a little bit. He needed to get some probiotics also. It was a fight to get it, but there was some help, and we did get some probiotics, or his mother did. And Tony right now, he's got what's called SIBO. I think it's like small intestine something bacteria, and bacteria overgrowth, I think is what it's called. He needs a certain lifestyle. This started in 2016. He was on the couch. He couldn't get off. Like, he was really sick. Through a naturopath, they got him back to good health. He needs a certain lifestyle. He needs a certain diet. He needs certain supplements. When he went into jail, obviously that started going sideways. He had to be put on a gluten-free diet. They did abide by that until he got shifted around a bit when he was going to the courtroom. And then he started having the gut issues, asking for a probiotic again, asking for some other stuff. They wouldn't even consider anything. He was lucky to get the probiotic. He discovered, we were talking one day and I said, can you get salt? He says, yeah, I can buy some at the canteen. I went, buy salt. You have to buy salt. And he said, yeah. So he's got a standing order because you can only make a canteen order once a week. So, and if you miss it, you miss it. So he started drinking hot salt water. We figured maybe that could help flush things out. And he discovered if he used high doses of salt in water, it would help his body do what it needs to do naturally. So his visual look right now, if you looked at his picture for 514 days ago to how he looks today, He's lost a lot of weight. He didn't have any weight to lose. His eyes are more sunken. His color is not as nice. He's struggling. Like I would say out of all of them, he's struggling the most. Jerry did go through a bout of, he wasn't eating well. He was eating the junk from the canteen, wasn't maybe exercising like he could. And then, if you can believe it, an inmate, I guess you would call him, was a physical body trainer. And he helped Jerry eat better. Jerry's color came back better. Jerry exercises probably 3 hours a day now. So that was hard when he went to Lethbridge because he couldn't exercise because he's stuck in a tiny little cell. So, and then Chris Lysick has injured knees. He's a big boy. He's like 6'5". He was 313 pounds. He said when he went in, he went down in his weight and now it's going back up and it's an unhealthy weight. He was very physically fit, but now the weight is not a good weight. So his knees, he needs cortisone shots because they will not give him his supplements that will help him with his pain. So he had to take, he needs cortisone shots. And I finally said to him one day, I said, you can't live like this, Chris. Like the pain he was in, just walking was horrible. I said, you need to take some of this donation money and please try and get the shots. So he did. It took 2 months at least to get the shots from the time he ordered it. And it's all secret. You know, he gets shackled up, handcuffed up, and waist belt and off to the wherever it is to get these shots. So he struggles with pain. So they've all got their own story. When I met Chris Lysick for the first time, I went to the remand in Lethbridge to meet him. I didn't recognize him at first. His face is very lean now. Like his face used to be a rounder face. And when I met him, I thought, oh my gosh, like it's hard. It's hard to see.
How much visitation are the guys allowed, be it for you as their advocate, family? Like what's that look like?
So in-person visitation, like for an example, Jerry gets Monday evening and Saturday afternoon. And you can have on a Monday night when I went to visit him, 2 other people can be with me at the same time as I'm in there to visit. I can't remember. I think it was either 2 30-minute, because I get them all mixed up, right? 2 30-minute visits in the evening. And then Saturday, I'm not sure what the Saturday afternoon, it could be 2 30 minutes. Some get 2 45-minute visits. But when Tony was in Medicine Hat, if somebody went to visit him Wednesday evening or late afternoon, I think it is, then his mom's visit on a Saturday, because she could get 2 45-minute visits, would be cut down to a 45-minute visit. So they would take off from one for the other. And yeah, it's very weird. Now, Chris, so Jerry would get Monday evening, Saturday afternoon. Tony would get late Wednesday afternoon and Saturday afternoon. Chris and Chris both get only weekday visits. One gets a Monday and a Wednesday, and one gets a Tuesday and a Thursday. They don't get any evening visits, and they get no Saturday visits. And I think Tessie last night, Tony's mom went to visit Tony in Calgary. It was 9:15 at night. That's the visit she got given to her. She took it. You know, she got somebody to drive her to Calgary last night and allow her to visit her son. I haven't heard yet how that was. I'll find out from her and the friend that took her. So it's all the remands are different. It's like Jerry said, the food in Lethbridge is great compared to Calgary. Tony had really good food in Medicine Hat. Chris and Chris, they get Lethbridge. It seems that's the middle of the road food. So during court, the food was disgusting. They were ending up with black, soggy lettuce in their sandwiches. The egg salad sandwiches were like 5 days old, moldy oranges, and nobody would claim responsibility for it. So finally, Chris Carbert ended up with so-called flu, which we think was food poisoning the Friday prior to the end of the court. And
so what you're saying is there was a deliberate attempt to mess with their food prior to this first court appearance.
well, somebody was giving them bad food. I don't know who it is, but I'll tell you, when Chris showed his lawyer finally after, close to 2 weeks, he showed her, and you got to remember, Chris was the one that ended up sick. And so if it was food poisoning and he sees black soggy lettuce in his sandwich now, he's not happy. And I heard the whole place in the Lethbridge court heard about it. He wasn't quiet. He started yelling. He was furious. And I don't blame him. He just got done being sick and really sick. His lawyer sent an email off to I don't know who. And it took 2 days and then the very last day of court, they got fresh sandwiches. One day they got good food.
Wow.
So like, it's inhumane. Like,
Yeah.
Like, look what they did to Chris Lysick when he first got to the Lethbridge. And this man has no record. He knows nothing about the law.
So this is another point I want to make sure I have correct. No criminal records whatsoever, misdemeanors, nothing on any of these guys.
I can get confirmation on that. I think Chris Carbert has a juvenile something.
Just one sealed juvenile record.
Yeah. The other three, like, I don't even think Tony's ever had a speeding ticket, but I can ask everybody, Gord, and I can confirm on that. I'll ask each one of the family members, and I'll get you 100% confirmation what each one has.
Right. That's it just like, I don't know how anyone could possibly believe that. Okay, another question I want to ask, to make sure I'm clear and the story is clear. These four gentlemen, did any of them know each other before this? Were any of them friends?
Yeah. Chris and Chris are best friends. They're like, they're uncles to their children. They've been friends since high school.
Right.
I'm not sure if Jerry really knew anybody because he was there 3 days and a few hours. They did cross each other's paths. They were in, like Lindsay Butler, the singer, when she sang down at the U.S. Canadian border, she's on the back of a flat deck truck. They were all there listening to her. So and then they crossed each other's paths in the saloon. And, so they became acquaintances there. But like and Tony was kind of like an acquaintance. Tony was sleeping in his truck. Chris Carbert's trailer, he asked him, he said, well, you can come and sleep in our trailer. Like, you're sleeping in your pickup. And we all do that. Like, we all did that at the convoy. Everybody, that's what you do. You just kind of help each other. Did they really know each other? No. Were they acquaintances? Kind of, yeah. But
and only just recently.
Yeah, I think,
right.
I think maybe in the past couple of months, they might have ran into each other at different things. Like, Tony was known for having prepping classes and canning classes and different workshops. Did they run into each other there? And I can't say much of what I heard in the courtroom, but acquaintances.
Right.
And certainly not before the Coutts thing. So before the Coutts thing, Chris and Chris knew each other.
You can't say they didn't meet each other prior. They could have. They were acquaintances. They could have ran into each other in a store, in a shop, in a prepping class. Like I have. I've met many people. I don't know their names. I don't know who they are.
Right. Well, like I say, I'm anybody who is looking at this with like critical faculties turned on, you have to wonder, four guys who only sort of just met each other are now cooking up a plan to shoot like murder police officers. Like, what? Like, none of this makes any sense.
Let me just touch on that one quickly. A couple of them are single fathers and have custody of their children. They were fighting for custody of their children. They were going through some of that. These are not men that wanted to jeopardize any of their family. So I find it hard to believe that they were deciding to do that.
Can you repeat the part about the children?
Yeah, so some of them are single fathers who were fighting for or had custody of their children.
Right.
Two of them are single fathers. One was in a custody, more of a like an access, trying to get access to a child. One has no children. He's an only child to an 80-year-old mother. So like I said, 2 single fathers that had their children. One man has children, plus was trying to gain access to a child. Right. So these are family people.
That's what I was trying to highlight. They wouldn't jeopardize the processes they were going through.
Exactly. And Gord, I don't know if you realize there was a officer, Roberta McHale. She on February 14th was the press release lady. Like she was.
Yeah, I saw that video. Yes.
Yeah. Like, so she told this lie that they came in separate to the demonstration. No, they didn't. Tony came in with his friends in his gravel truck. Chris and Chris are friends, but they even came in separate on day one. And Jerry was hardly there. So coming in separate, like they made it sound like they were in the corner ready to jump out. Like you said, the boogeyman. Well, the boogeymen were all there from day one. So.
Right.
And Donald, if you don't mind, I think you got a couple of things you might be able to add to this, and specifically around the conditions in remand versus prison. So they're in remand, which is like the worst place to be. Even prison would be an upgrade for them when it comes to their health and stuff. So you want to kind of touch on that?
Yes, absolutely. In remand, you're being shuttled around. It's for people who have not yet had their trial. And for someone to be in the remand system for 1.5 years is just incredible. At least in prison, there's a stability. There's a doctor or a nurse at the prison who has all your prescriptions, but these people are being moved around. And at least in the prison, guards get to know you and know what kind of a person you are. There's a stability. You have your own little cell or your bunk or whatever. But remand, the system is so devastating to people. I'm not even talking solitary confinement here, or segregation as we call it in Canada, but solitary confinement. And so the system is so tough on people, the remand system, that our courts credit it 2 for 1 when you're sentenced. In other words, you're in the system for 6 months, and then you plead guilty of your crime or you're found guilty of your crime. That 6 months counts for 1 year in prison. So they'll take a year.
It's a harsh
off.
penalty is the way they're kind of dealing with that.
Exactly. So these 4, the Coutts Four, have been in prison the equivalent of over 3 years. This is our law. This is our standard here in Canada. Every day in there counts 2 for 1. And the other thing I want to say is they're in solitary much of the time. And that is torture. We had a decision from the British Columbia courts. And I think my affidavit, my time was part of that or supported it. Solitary confinement is torture. There's no doubt about it. The courts have found it now. And segregation is solitary confinement. When you hear that word, it's meant to be excuse me, a euphemism for solitary, because we don't have solitary, we have segregation. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong here. There's some really tough characters in solitary. Dangerous to themselves. That's the way it is. But for just ordinary people to be in solitary, wow. Till you've been there, you just don't know. And I've been there. I was there for 63 days. Look, I was vindicated afterwards, but it doesn't matter. I did 63 days in solitary. And that was, at the time, I was, 59 years old, stable guy. I had loving family and friends waiting for me outside. And it was only 63 days in 2 separate goes. That was tough. Mm-hmm. Really, really tough. And I can only imagine, my heart goes out to these guys because it's torture, nothing less.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight a couple more things for you, Gord. So there's a husband and wife who can communicate via phone and text, I think, but they won't let them physically connect. So you have that problem. And that's because remand doesn't provide that. If you're in prison, you would be able to have conjugal, but remand you can't. And it's kind of like purgatory because they're still waiting to find out what they're going to go through. And this is why we credit it 2-for-1, because it's a horrible place to be. So my opinion, Gord, they're trying to break these gentlemen by giving them the worst of our system. And what they would like is these guys to either give up and say, yes, okay, or break as a human. I don't think they're interested in justice, this particular matter.
Right.
Just judging by what they're doing here.
You see the same thing here in the United States, where the justice system, such as it is and such as it exists in, municipalities, states, the feds, what they do is they just throw every book at you. They don't just throw the book. They take the whole library. They just like bury you in charges, and like whether or not you're innocent or guilty doesn't matter. What they do is they try and just get you to give up immediately. Like, listen, you could go to court and you will have the full weight of the state against you, and you're facing 10 years in jail, 20 years in jail, whatever. But if you just take this plea deal over here, we put you in jail for 5 years and then you'll get out and everything's going to be fine. So they basically give you like the choice between turds and shit sandwiches. And the question at hand of whether or not you're guilty almost becomes irrelevant. They just want you to admit it and save them time, and
Absolutely.
they get their conviction. And then it looks very good for district attorneys who are elected in many places in the United States. And, if they have a solid conviction record, which includes getting people to plead guilty, that makes them look good. It's politically advantageous for people in the system to basically, bury the accused in all kinds of threatening, very damaging, long prison sentences and punishments to just get you to give up and say, okay, yeah, I did it, and accept a plea deal. Right. And I see some of that going on here.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is there's an inverted house of cards here. So it's like an upside down house of cards, which is very unstable. And at the bottom 4 is the Couttsmen. Without these guns, without these boogeymen, the EA and the POEC fall apart. So, and that could mean PMO office is in trouble. Like, I believe they absolutely need these guys to either confess, be found guilty, or just break. Because if there's anything else that comes out, I think this house of cards.
Can you explain? Okay, so something I would like to know, and I think other people are going to want to know here to explain your conclusion here, is how. So, on the assumption the boys get exonerated, the charges get thrown out, they get found innocent, insula. How does that invalidate or affect the ruling from the POEC, which is now basically done and dusted? Like, how does this affect it?
So the POEC was public, so we got all that information except for one portion, which was in camera, which was the Coutts Four situation. So there was intelligence, there was information, there was something that they provided to Rulu in camera, so in private, during the POEC, which had him conclude that these are guilty men. If that turns out to be based on the same thing that the warrants and the stuff were based on in Alberta, and it was bogus information, a complete lie, an improper affidavit, well, and technically, that information should come out. That should not be part of the report. And if Rulu was looking at that as confirmation from the government that the national security was being jeopardized by this Diagolon group. Remember, Diagolon is a comedy group. But this is not what Rollo thinks right now. Rollo thinks that these guys with men, these guns, were related to Diagolon. So if these turn out to be just family men, got wrapped up in a stupid narrative that was a lie, what would we do? Well, we would press for a re-evaluation of that report. Because if he did build this national security concern, it's not the borders were open. If he based it off of this Diagolon white supremacist group, which had all these guns in Alberta, and that turns out to be false, everything, it's a poisonous tree at that point. So everything that comes from that is incorrect.
Right.
And
That's a very good point.
And the only thing in the POEC that actually held weight, as far as I'm concerned, in the public's eye, was the stuff we didn't get to hear, the in-camera stuff, and that was Coutts.
Right. That's very, very, very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up, Jason.
Yeah, so I think they have to have either these guys break or confess or convicted, because if they don't, these 4 cards at the bottom of that pyramid are going to fall apart.
Right. And does anyone have any sense of, like, I mean, obviously, this could go to the highest levels, Mendocino, Trudeau, but like, does anyone have a feeling for like who, or are you able to name names of people in the bureaucracy or in the justice system or within CSIS or the RCMP who are making this happen for Trudeau?
Ex-commander of the RCMP, Lucky.
Right.
That's your answer. She's the one has the RCMP in Alberta. She had the RCMP at the border. She had the RCMP in Ottawa. All roads lead to her, which then go to PMO.
Right. So what does Lucky? This is probably going to sound like a stupid question, but what does Lucky have to gain from? Obviously we know what Trudeau has to gain, what Rouleau has to gain, what the narrative has to gain, but what does Lucky have to gain by the punishment of these guys?
I have no idea, but other than their Jan 6 conversation before the convoy that was going around with Marco and Trudeau, and they were working with Lucky. Because if you look at the POEC reports from the RCMP about the convoy, completely wildly inaccurate, completely ignoring the OPP reports, which were very accurate. So
Right.
OPP had excellent information on these
guys.
guys.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, but the RCMP had completely opposite, and that's who was pushing a lot of the intelligence. Even CSIS didn't confirm and agree with the narrative. It was the RCMP who were pushing it hard. Why they're doing that? Keep her job, a relationship, who knows? But absolutely from the behavior, that's where a lot of the narrative was being driven.
Is she still the RCMP commissioner today?
No, just recently she's been replaced.
Right.
Yeah. So just in time, I guess, as if things are falling apart, I don't know, but she's recently been replaced.
Right. Oh boy. Yeah, and I'm also a big fan of our friend in Nova Scotia, Jeremy McKenzie, and his discussion about the Portapique massacre and Lucky's involvement with all that has been very illuminating. Yeah, I guess I didn't see where she would be part of the Coutts thing too, which I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Well, it's Alberta, and it's also the Tamara stuff. So it was the RCMP that picked her up in Alberta, Canada-wide warrant, dragged her across the country for no reason, just to do a Canada Day optics. That was RCMP as well. She was still in power at that time.
Right. Speaking of Tamara Leach, I believe her and Chris Barber are still facing charges.
I'm not sure, but I believe yes. I think the answer is yes. And I have Chris Barber on for an interview coming up, so I'll ask him that.
Yeah, and it's the whole counseling mischief thing, right? Like they literally have nothing else on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we do expect those to be thrown out. She won't be convicted of anything there, but it doesn't matter. The damage has been done, and they got their pictures already.
Right. Yeah. The whole thing stinks to high heaven. And
now I can add one more piece about media for you.
Sure.
Okay, so of course we expect main state media not to do much about this. In fact, they will fight against it. But alternate media. So we have like 3 big ones: Rebel, True North, and Western Standard. None of them are touching this. Western Standard started to and stopped. And I've communicated, I'm not going to name names, but I've communicated to people in the back, and I said, hey, can you help us out? Do you want to get involved? And I got one person that says, I know these guys. I know one of them personally, grew up with them. These are great people, or at least he's a great person. And testimony was, this is a good person. I can't talk. I'm not allowed. Best of luck. Go for it, is the messages I'm getting from alt media behind the scenes.
Right.
I don't know why alt media is doing that.
So I remember Western Standard was one of the only publications in Canada to report on a report from CSIS that came out at the end of February of last year, and it was called Flags of the Protests. It was like a secret CSIS document that was, later revealed that CSIS had sent their own investigators around Ottawa and other protest sites to try and like sniff out more people with, quote unquote, like Nazi flags or whatever. And in that report, as according to the Western Standards piece on it, that the CSIS people, such as you might be able to trust this, basically said that, like, the very tiny handful of folks they found with, offensive flags or markings or signs, when interviewed by these undercover CSIS agents, basically said, we're accusing the government of this. We're accusing Trudeau of having Nazi policies. Like, this is not an expression of, solidarity with the original meaning of these symbols or slogans or whatnot. And I don't know if anybody else reported on that, but it seems interesting to me that, Western Standard went to the wall to like report on something that the rest of the media ignored, but on this.
Well, yeah, and they did a good job. So in February 2022, they were the ones who reached out to the RCMP and pushed them for an explanation on who owned what guns in that picture. They didn't end up getting an answer. They got an apology, sorry we took so long, but they didn't move that story anymore. And I did reach out to my contact there and asked if I can have a copy of what they received, because we have a copy, but I want to get a copy from them to confirm it's a legit copy.
Nothing.
They're not giving it to me. No, they just flat out said no.
Do you feel like, do you feel perhaps maybe, and this isn't a question necessarily about those three outlets, but like the media in general, over and above their reluctance to, do their jobs, and be the fifth estate, do you think that they would use the publication ban on the court proceedings brought by the defense as an excuse to just say, hey,
So
we
here
just
it is
can't,
right here.
we just
So
can't
Rebel
talk about it?
News, yep, exactly. So there's a comment right here. So Rebel News said they can't touch the story because of the media ban. We are aware of what the media ban is. They can be doing what we're doing right now.
Right, yeah, because the media ban, as you guys said, is very narrow, only on court proceedings and court documents. Anything else
Right.
that's already public, go
They
to town.
could be doing what we're doing right now. There's no reason why they can't commentary on it, can't bring people in to look at the photo. They could do that. And another thing about Rebel News, I just want to highlight, because I'm pushing this issue right now with Ezra. Truckerlawyer.ca was a website he set up to support the legal fight for anybody connected to this. He came out on TV and just blasted the fact that he's going to be supporting them all. Granny can confirm not a dime has headed this way. And that's also been confirmed with Bridget Belton on some of the truckers in Ottawa. There's some very unrepresented truckers that have no legal assistance. So there was a massive amount of money collected for donations. We know that's true, but wasn't distributed to the people that need it at this point. And my contacts at Rebel won't talk. They won't even give me a comment on whether or not they're going to do anything about this.
Interesting.
Just putting it out there, like, this is truth. So look, like Ezra said, I'm not helping them because they had guns. So again, this whole gun thing is very important. Everybody believed it. And as I'm taking Ezra on his face value, if he doesn't want to get involved in a gun issue, you better believe it's a real gun issue then, because 514 days with no representation on this stuff, like, come on.
Right. All right. So now I'm going to ask a question that might run afoul of the publication ban. I guess this would be a good one for Donald, because he sort of disassembled the narrative around, the taking of this photo in the first place. Has there been any evidence presented at all connecting any of those firearms or equipment in that photo to these men whatsoever?
Okay, well, first of all, I've never been to any of the hearings. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard any recordings from the hearings, and I really have no inside information as to the evidence. Everything I've done has been based upon news articles, mostly in the mainstream, especially with that photo, which is also on the RCMP website. So my analysis of the evidence so far has been from public sources. So I'm not, I'm just giving my professional opinion. I'm not running afoul of the court order. I couldn't possibly be because nothing is coming from inside the court. That said, look, I have said that I don't know if any of these men are guilty of anything or not. I don't know if each one is innocent of every charge. I simply don't know. And it's all speculation. But they've been in jail for a year and a half with no bail. We have a cop killer out on bail. An accused cop killer out on bail in Toronto right now. We have people who are accused of multiple forest fire arsons that just did vast destruction. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of people out on weapons charges and serious violence charges on bail. Now, in Canada, it's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And if we can let someone out on bail with an ankle bracelet or reporting conditions or conditions not to speak to witnesses or whatever else, we tailor each release to the case. And we do that for thousands and thousands of Canadians. So this is just political. I've said, and that denying bail, especially denying bail, is a political act in the case of the Coutts Four. And I believe, and this is in my article. I don't know if you've read my latest article on this, Gord, but I believe that it was done, denying a bail, keeping them in, was done for three reasons. One, to act as public evidence and justification that the accused persons were so dangerous that it justified the use of the Emergencies Act. And time again, the Coutts Four and that photo of the weapons that I tear all apart has been used to justify the imposition of the Emergencies Act. And number two, the reason we keep them in jail too, I'm speaking of the sinister reasons that they're in jail, political reasons, is it influences potential jury members. They are more likely to convict an accused who is in custody. That's proven. There's studies, everybody knows. So keeping people in prison at the time of their trial and having them brought in shackles or however it's done, that influences jury members. They must be really bad people if they didn't make bail. We even have an accused a cop killer out in Toronto on bail. These people must be even worse. So it's to influence jury members, and it does. And the third thing is we're going to teach those truckers and all Canadians a good lesson about what happens to you and your family if you oppose this Liberal government. And those are the three reasons that I can see, and I truly believe that they are being held in jail. I know the investigation was influenced by politics. I've written about that. And if the investigation and the no bail were influenced by political or, absolutely done for political reasons, do you think that maybe the charges and the other gathering of the evidence might have been influenced by politics? I think we're going to see some amazing things when this comes to trial.
Absolutely. So that's a long way of saying no. We don't have any information on whose guns whose or anything like that. It's
right. Now, one more thing I want to ask, just to make sure I'm clear on this. We touched on it briefly on our last video chat. So this pre-trial that went down recently, remind me what date that was?
June 29th.
June 29th. And there was some really interesting events which took place. Are those events subject to the publication ban?
I would think the information in that sealed envelope would be. I would say anything that would be it. But we don't have a copy of that.
Right. So how is it that we came to find out about RCMP being told to seek further counsel? One of the Crown lawyers, something like, well, remind me exactly what went down.
Sure. So the quick synopsis is on Thursday, the original main Crown attorney wasn't there. And I
Yeah.
believe a second person who's normally there wasn't there. There was a new Crown representative there. The conversation was basically run by the defense because it's their application they're bringing forward. The reason explained why the Crown wasn't there is they're a potential witness or defendant to whatever's in that envelope. And it was requested that, well, from the RCMP, they wanted to see the envelope, of course. They want to be part of that. But they were requested to have their counsel take a look at it. So their counsel's now involved taking a look at that.
Okay.
And that's really all we know, other than the judge at first said something along the lines like, this can't be. And then the defense attorney says, trust me, it is. And then at that point, basically the mood was, all right, we have to deal with this. And now we're going to go back on the 25th to hear what the result of that was.
Right. And so what else is happening on the July 25th pretrial, or what is expected to happen?
That's all the information we have.
Wow.
Yeah.
They don't give you...
One more piece is the Law Society of Alberta is involved, and we believe the Justice Minister is involved. We don't know about that part. We're trying to ask and get information on confirmation on that.
So
what the Law Society is.
So the Law Society of Alberta, that's basically like the bar. That's like the Lawyers Association.
Correct. And they don't do criminal. They only do professional misconduct.
Right. So the fact they're being brought in means to potentially investigate misconduct on the part of somebody involved here.
Correct.
Right. And the speculation,
and it's not the defense attorneys in trouble.
And it's the speculation is that it's the Crown or the RCMP's counsel who have done something wrong.
The speculation is it's the Crown.
Right.
And speculation is it's likely an affidavit that got questioned or some evidence came out. There's lots of speculation on what it could be, but I'm a legally trained guy. There's only a few things that will get a Crown in trouble, and that would be perjury and an affidavit. There's very few things that Crown signs under penalty of law. And that's what has to happen here. If they're talking about defendant, if they're using that word, that would be a criminal defendant. And that's all we know, though.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Wow. And as far as actually getting the trial, the main show underway, we're talking 2024?
May, June 2024 are the dates, the months that have been talked about, yes.
Wow.
Now, ideally, on the 25th, they get released on bail. A miracle would be they're released. But ideally, they're released on bail and we can get this trial started.
Wow. All right. July 25th.
Yeah. So that'll be a big day. I'll be streaming it. I'll be there starting at 6 a.m. I'm going to try and get into the courthouse. Again, with my legal training, I will be able to understand more about what's going on in there and report what I can. Again, there's certain things we can't report on. But I'd love to see Rebel and Western and True North there as well. I'd love to see them even talking to people there. And we've had family on, we've had friends on. None of that's happening for them right now other than us. So.
Oh, man.
Do you have any more questions? Or Granny, do you want to add any part of this that we may have left out? I know.
Yeah, please throw any comments at me. Like I say, there's lots going on here. It seems like it seems like a lot of information for an article that's probably going to get capped out at 1,500 words. Newsweek typically doesn't do real long. And this isn't, like I say, again, this is not like deep dive journalism here. This is simply an op-ed to like show people in the US what's going on. So I don't know how much of this is going to get like carved off by the editing process, but like the more information, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Granny. You have anything else you want to add?
Well, the main thing that I always talk about is the truth is locked inside that remand jail and not being allowed out. 4 men have their individual truths and they're not allowed to share it. It's 514 days. My main concern with them, obviously, right now is their physical and mental health. Mentally, they're going through dead time, which is a psychological torture. Donald's article I shared with 3 of them. Crystal had shared with Chris Lysick. I do believe that's helping them with dead time. They can hang on to some hope from that article. They need to be able to have faith that they're going to walk out. But when everything keeps being pushed back, like June 12th, they were literally, Tony was counting meals until June 12th. Chris Lysick started counting, I remember him talking 89 days till June 12th. And then the rug got pulled out from underneath them again. Like mentally, this is so hard.
Man.
It's a torture.
It is. And I can't understand why more people, well, I can understand why more people aren't coming forward is because they don't know about it. Like sharing, like I keep saying, like one person can make a difference. Look at the 4 of us. So I always say, yes, financial is important. Writing letters is extremely important for the men, but share, just keep sharing the story. And we're getting there. We're starting to get some traction out there, but it's still a little tiny part of the public out there. And again, they've been in there 514 days. They've got to have some really serious evidence to keep them in there that long. That's and that it's exactly what people are thinking.
Yeah, and when I speak to people and they hear about it the first time, majority of the times, way more often than not, they're surprised, shocked, and they are for getting them out on bail. I haven't really run into anybody that says, good, let them rot. Everybody I talk to at this point, they don't even know if they're guilty or not, but they take the position of, well, innocent until proven guilty, shouldn't you be on jail or on bail? And that's the number one response I've been getting. So that's good news, but they have to hear it. They have to hear about it. So once we get the news to them, then we get the support. Okay, and Donald, do you want to add anything else that you think might be relevant that might help Gord here? You're muted, bud. Donald, you're muted. It's just his thing. If he didn't do that once, it wouldn't be Donald.
I didn't do it. It must be Cesus. In any event, 1,500 words. Yeah, that's not many words. There's a lot to pack into that. But it's so heartening to see major U.S. media, because Newsweek is major U.S. media, taking an interest in these men and this story and why everybody gets bail in Canada, but not these men, not the Coutts Four.
Right. Right. And I also want to highlight to you, Gord, the Manitoba incident. So during the convoy, there was a gentleman with an SUV that ran over protesters.
Yes, I remember that. Yep.
He got bail after 7 days.
Right.
So if it's really about public harm and willingness to hurt, well, he ran over people on purpose, and it's on videos. But just like everybody else in Canada, he got bail. If you have any more questions, we're happy to answer them.
Wow. Oh man,
it's starting to hit you. It's starting to hit you that this could be a big problem, and it could mean PMO.
The enormity of what's going on here, and like I say, that over and above the facts of the case, over and above what we know and what we perceive to be going on here, we still have this issue with how the Canadian media functions, their connections to the government, and like how they relate to the American media. And I need to be very, very careful about this because, like, as I said before, the Canadian media is very insular and they get super bonkers crazy in one direction or the other whenever a major U.S. media outlet even sneezes towards Canada, right? Mm-hmm. And something this big that has the implications that it does, like I'm going to be kicking a hornet's nest at home, and I'm happy to kick it. I just want to make sure I kick it in such a fashion that, like, it's kicked properly and breaks the whole thing open, and the queen bees start being worried. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, on our side, we drive the speed limit We stop at all stop signs and we signal all turns because we're concerned. Because my police force is the Alberta RCMP.
Yeah. Yeah, your I just want to comment on your studio,
Oh, sure.
Jason. I got a kick out of it. I take it that's like an RV camper trailer you've
It's a fifth
converted.
wheel trailer, my brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I set up the whole kitchen's gone. I just have a plywood piece of wood here with a cardboard on top, some duct tape to keep me from getting splinters, and we broadcast.
Out in an undisclosed location in the woods in Alberta.
I am off-grid solar with Starlink, yes.
Oh, amazing.
Well, this wasn't part of my plan. My plan was to come and raise my family and build our house right behind me here. We're homesteaders, we're homeschoolers, we're doing that until Trudeau on February 22nd looked at the camera and said, if you don't like what I did here, and he did en français, if you don't like what I did here, run against me and make change. So I did. I'm running as an independent and started this show to get the awareness of me out. And then in the process, we ran into all of these issues and it's now turned into this.
Right. Yeah, for a guy who's claimed to be all about like openness and transparency and fairness, and Canada's this, shining beacon to the rest of the world, and to have this, like I said before, a Kafkaesque, Camusian, absurdist nightmare going on, where this trial.
You're using all the trucker terms there.
Well, for anyone out there that hasn't, there's a French philosopher by the name of Albert Camus, who was a legitimate anti-fascist. He wrote an underground newspaper during the Nazi occupation of France called Combat. This guy was French resistance, right? And he wrote a book after the war called The Plague, La Peste, right? And it was about a town in Algeria, a French, imperial outpost town, and a plague came upon the town. But the book itself was an analogy about the Nazi occupation of France and how it affected everyone's psychology and like the moral cowardice that was on display by French society, those who didn't fight back, the Vichy regime, right? So he used this story about a plague, but I mean, all the connections are right there. And another book that Camus wrote was called L'étranger, The Stranger, and it's about the trial of a man who commits a murder, and he just doesn't understand what's going on to him, and it's sort of like, it's just this, all of the like crazy stuff going on here. And then Franz Kafka, obviously, wrote Metamorphosis and wrote another book called The Trial about a man who gets arrested, accused of like murdering the landlady of the building he lives in, and doesn't know his accusers, is denied access to any information, thrown in solitary confinement, totally confused. And everything that's happening to the guys in Coutts happened to this guy K in the book called The Trial. It's a seminal piece of literature, and that's where the term Kafkaesque nightmare comes from. If you ever see that in any other piece of writing, it's become this like, term, a cliche almost, and it's about his book, The Trial, and that's exactly what's happening to the Coutts guys right now. So like,
how does that book end?
Oh man, I can't. It's been so long since I read it. I actually don't think it's a good ending.
Well, let's find out, because I wonder if
I'm gonna have to reread. I read it when I was a kid. I read La Peste and L'Étranger when I was a kid. All worth revisiting. And I mean, I can't, like, the stuff like this isn't supposed to happen in like a modern Western society with like a functioning legal system, functioning justice system, where the government can declare enemies of the state. Like this is Soviet, East German Stasi. Like this crap isn't supposed to happen here, and yet here we are.
Right, so, right. And Canada's number one export right now is condemning other countries for doing what they're doing. Like we hear them condemn other countries, Russia,
Crimea,
like all that stuff, but they're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, the lady doth protest too much, you know.
Yep.
What Mr. Castro, our very unfortunate prime minister. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm gonna get to work on this, and
We don't want to hold you too much now.
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's time. Keep an eye on your email inboxes if there's more questions. Margaret, I'll be in contact with you about making sure this is screened properly for complying with the publication ban. And I'll talk to you guys again very soon.
Thank you very much, Gord. Really appreciated your time. We ran long because this was a really important episode and your time was valuable. And we definitely wanted to do this. This is a spotlight show. We want to bring the spotlight out there. And we're doing that by meeting every single day for an hour at least and going through all the pieces that we can and bringing attention and information to everybody about this because nobody else is.
Nobody else is doing it. And thank you very much.
Yeah, and we need this. This is part of democracy. This is the media part. We need media, so we have to step up and do it. Granny, by far, is the champion of this. Without her, we wouldn't know. Can you imagine? Oh my gosh, she just broke my heart. Could you imagine if Granny didn't pick this up? So God bless you, Granny, because if that didn't happen, I don't think any of us would be talking today. So thank you, Granny.
Tony actually said those words. His mom was sharing that with me. Tessie and I were eating breakfast, and she says, Tony said to me last night, what if Granny hadn't stepped in? And I went, whoa, yeah. But I did. And I said, we don't need to think about the what ifs because they're too hard to think about. These men are already living the greatest Canadian nightmare. We don't need to add any more to it. They want to come home, so let's bring them home.
Absolutely. And I don't know where your religious thing is at Gord, but for some reason we got a corruption investigator who was a friend. He knew the police officer in Edmonton. You got me as a paralegal out in Alberta willing to do this. You got Granny keeping track. We all come together somehow. I'm not sure where you are with divine intervention, but it sure feels pretty cool.
I'm a free agent where it concerns such things, but I'll take it. You know, yeah. If we've been chosen to do this, or brought to it in some other fashion, or maybe it's just our own innate sense of injustice, that put us all in gear to get down the road with this. Yeah, sure. I'll take it.
Yeah, we'll take it. Happy to. Whatever it is, whatever we want to call it, injustice, the pursuit of that, whatever it is, it's working. And we're getting the word out. I'm looking at the numbers right now, and we've had our largest show today. So thank you all very much for tuning in and doing this live. And there's a lot of sharing going on Facebook. So I think we're just going to keep growing this. So thank you very much, Gord, for the attention on it. Really appreciate it. And thank you for being one of those reporters who wants to find out and actually dot I's and cross T's and spend the time doing that.
I mean, I would not call myself a reporter. Again, like I appreciate that.
It's a yucky title.
Well, I fell into this, man. Like I just started talking about the trucking business, and then I ended up talking about Freedom Convoy, and now I'm doing this. And it was never my intention to ever have to do any of this.
That's the same story for all of us.
Like, I just want to drive a truck and raise my family and be left alone, and the government won't leave anybody alone, and they keep doing stuff to people. So
yes,
you know, I have to say something. You know, were we not all raised by our parents and our society? When you see something bad going on, say something, make your voice heard, right? That's what we got told. You know, the Fifth Estate, the real journalists are supposed to be doing it. The people that get paid for this, you know, I'm not getting anything for this. Newsweek might pay me if it ever gets out. There's no guarantee. Who knows? I might go to Newsweek and they might say, "Oops, too spicy. We're not publishing this." There's no guarantee that this is even going to come out. They said, "Please write on it." Mm-hmm. Maybe what I write that will be too much. I don't know. You know,
but we'll take whatever comes, and wherever this goes, we're pretty confident that there's a path. So we're going to follow that. So thank you very much for working on that.
Yeah, no. And again, thank you guys. This has been lovely. I appreciate all your work, Donald's writings, your show, Granny, all the efforts you guys have done in. just keep going. And like I say, I'm gonna get to work on this. And as soon as it's ready, you guys will be the first to know. I'd be happy to come back and discuss it again later.
Sure. Maybe this time next week, we'll see where you're at, and maybe we can do an update with you.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, thank you very much, Gord. So I'm going to wrap up so you can get back to writing. We don't want to hold you much longer. And
All right.
Granny's got some work to do. Don's got some work to do. So we're going to wrap up. Do you want to just say goodbye to the audience for now?
Yeah. Nice meeting everyone. Thanks for listening. I don't know. I don't know how many of you are there. I don't have a counter or anything, but
We're about 400 right now.
Oh, wow. Holy cow, man. Pressure. Thanks everybody. Again, I didn't mean to like step into this breach, but here we are. If you want to follow my writing, such as I do very much of it, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. I'd say follow my Twitter, but they kicked me off again for a third time. You know, I did a podcast interview with Granny Mackay a few weeks ago. Go listen to that. I interviewed Eva Chipiuk, who defended the Freedom Convoy.
We're working with her.
Yeah.
We didn't even get into that, but we're working with her on a vaccine lawsuit.
Excellent. There's a guy, there's a writer from England. He goes by under the pseudonym KB Goldtooth. He wrote some very, very interesting stuff about the Together movement in the UK, which was their equivalent of the freedom movement against all of this COVID lunacy. He wrote another thing. He wrote a thing about how impressed he was with the Freedom Convoy. I had him on my show. That's a pretty interesting one. His story of like being in England, literally watching video streams on YouTube of the Freedom Convoy and bursting into tears. You know, wow, these Canadian truckers are finally doing something. So his story is interesting. That's on my Substack. If you're just interested in the trucking business, I mean, truckers got this whole thing started. And one of the points I've tried to make to a few people is that, like, you know, people want to like point to the vaccine mandates. You know, how come this was the thing that like set off the truckers? And I'm like, well, over and above the COVID stuff, if you just isolate the truckers, there's so much stuff there's so much bad policy, bad regulation, bad economics, corporate welfare. There's so many things that have been affecting the trucking industry for like the last 40 odd years that have made it very difficult to make money, have made the job harder than it needs to be. You know, we've got companies in British Columbia bringing indentured servants to drive truck in Canada from India. There was a big investigation in 2019 by the Globe and Mail that Trudeau's done nothing about. And so like the vaccine mandates became this like straw that broke the back of a super B train, you know, like there's just all this stuff going on in the world of trucking that not many people know about. And that was sort of like my aim in getting into writing. So if like anything, you know, anything about trucking, follow my Substack, listen to my podcast, whatever. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for listening.
You're awesome, Gord. And make sure you tune in on August 4th. I'll have Chris Barber on. So we'll get from him. In that particular episode is how the vaccine mandates affected the industry. So we'll be talking about exactly that.
Awesome.
And that's part of my vaccine, how the vaccines affected the professions week. So on Monday, I have a lawyer who's Viva Fry's brother. So Daniel, he'll be talking about how the vaccine mandates affected the profession of legal. On Tuesday, we'll be talking to some doctors and nurses, same question. On Thursday, we're talking to a pilot, same question. And then Friday, truckers. So if you want to tune in for that week, you're going to hear about the profession, how it was affected by mandates.
Right. No, that's fantastic. And I'm glad you're looking into that. There's some really big questions there. And like I say, they're leading up to that, there's a number of stress factors placed on truckers in the trucking industry that, like I say, as I like to put it, it was the straw that broke the B train. So
right. And putting a cynical hat on, I believe they targeted the truckers because they were the only profession that had that. Pilots, train drivers, you know, engineers, and captains of boats didn't have that. It was just truckers. So of the 4 ways that we do logistical transportation in Canada, only one of them had the mandate. I know that because I'm a pilot and we didn't have one.
Right. That's very interesting. All right.
That seems targeted to me.
We could go on forever. But
yes.
Again, like I say, thank you, everybody. Thank you for everything you're doing. I'm going to get writing.
We'll get you out here. Thank you very much, Gord, and we'll talk to you very soon, I'm sure.
All right,
And Granny,
peace.
do you want to say goodbye? Peace, Gord. You want to say goodbye, Granny, and we'll wrap up?
Sure. And like I said, you've seen 4 of us here today, but I'd like to thank the thousands that are out there sharing this and getting it out, because that share button has a lot of power. And that share button may be what brings these boys home, because there's going to be people watching our shows. And I talked about one of the guys yesterday, and we talked about whistleblowers. We know they're watching us.
Yes.
We know they have a conscience. We know they have empathy. And I know they're being haunted, because how can you not be haunted? So please step forward and ease your conscience and help these boys come home and help their families receive their boys home. So love everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Absolutely. And C says, we know you're listening. Have a heart. We're not evil. We're not evil at all. And maybe we're changing you too. Whoever's listening now, join us. Donald, you want to say goodbye? You might be muted. No,
Goodbye.
you're good.
I'm really optimistic. I get more and more optimistic every day, the more I hear.
Yeah, and as a writer that publishes stuff, you know what the reach could be for an article online. So this is a big deal. Well, thank you both very much. Stick around. We'll chat at the end, but I'll wrap up here and say goodbye because we all have a lot of work to do. So, everybody, 1,500 words. That's roughly 3 words a day that they're in there. 3 words for each day that they're in there. That's all we got. But I have faith. We just met a trucker from Canada who's well-read, has a great brain, has got the right motives, got the right ambition, and is going to do this mission with us. He doesn't necessarily believe in divine intervention, but can you explain that? Okay. Like the perfect type of person to come and write this stuff just shows up. Whatever it is, he's a freelance nut, he says, but whatever it is, I'm glad he's here. I believe him. I trust him. I have a lot of faith in that he's going to do the right thing. He's going to assist. It is an opinion piece, which means when you read it, you know you're getting someone's opinion, but that will open doors and start that snowball rolling. And is it going to be the American media who comes in here and helps Canada wake up on this issue? That's fine with us. It's just sad that it had to come from there, but we're good. We're good. And yes, I'm looking at the numbers. We're on 8 different platforms. We are record breaking for us right now as we speak. So you guys keep it up. You're helping. Every share, every like, every view, live or otherwise, after the fact, helps. It does help. Put the comments in, do the chats. All of that helps propagate. I can tell that I'm being suppressed on YouTube, but I'm not being suppressed on the others. So go ahead and push. All right, everybody, put those comments in. Absolutely. It helps the algorithm. It also helps us communicate with you. And if you have questions, do it. Do the subscribe, do the like, do all that kind of stuff. Because again, we want more ears. And eventually it's going to be an ear that can actually do something or whistle blow. Like Granny said, we might get into the conscience of that person who said, I saw this, but they didn't, or gave some sort of information that they're withholding or something. There could be a whistleblower. Somebody in the RCMP. How's your heart feeling right now? Okay. Crown's office. Do you know something? You can talk. So let's get this out. We're live on Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Getter. So get out there and share it on all those platforms if you can. A couple of you go on a couple platforms to make sure you can get it out there. Thank you for that. If you like it, clip it. It does help get it out there. There's a lot of people that need to hear that little piece and then come back for the entire story. So if you like it, clip it, please. And of course, join our Discord server. This is where we're getting together to review information. We've had a few people come up and say, hey, I have lots of stuff. I direct them there. They drop it there. So if you want to actually get more involved and roll up your sleeves, you can join our Discord server. Well, folks, thank you all very much. This was a longer day, but I think we needed to keep hearing about American media and what they're up to. You can take that graphic off there, Paula. Thank you. So thank you all very much. You know how I feel about you. I love you all. And look at this. It's a bigger family. We got the plaid going. Even Gord wore plaid. We got to get Granny one, but plaid family is here to stay. And even if the boys are out, the men are out on the 25th, this isn't over. We're going to find out what's going on. If they're having a trial, what's going on with the Crown. So get used to this mug. You might be seeing me for a while. And I will drive the speed limit. I will not roll through stop signs, and I will signal every single intention because they had to lawyer up and they also protect me. So we're going to be careful around here. Love you all very much, and God bless.
Bye.